Hi everyone and welcome to my channel, and to this video where I'm going to explain several different methods for creating your line art for a pastel painting. So I'm going to talk you through three main methods. First one being tracing, second using a grid method, and third freehand sketching. And my aim in this video is to give you lots of tips to help you improve your sketching skills, as it really does make you a better painter. So I hope that you enjoy this. If you do, please do hit the subscribe button here on YouTube. Also consider checking me out on Patreon, because it's those guys who are really helping me to fund all of these videos. And in return for the support over there, I create fresh content every month with long real-time tutorials that are narrated with colour codes, mostly to help you into the world of soft pastel. But I hope that you enjoy this video right now. So in this video I'm going to use this image of my lovely friend who I recently painted as a full-length paint-along demo here on YouTube. If you want to check that out, it takes you right from the beginning through all of the painting stages and you can work right along with me. But today I'm using a different image of her, and I'm going to show you how I would start from the beginning and actually get my line art created before I start to pastel. So firstly, let's discuss tracing briefly. For example, if I wanted to trace this, I could use my laptop as a sort of light box and simply tape my paper over the top of the image. Make sure that I've got my brightness turned up full. Perhaps turn some lights off in the room so that I can see the light coming from the laptop and shining through the paper. Then it's just as simple as taking a pencil and tracing it onto my paper. So that's a very simple and quick method to get your line art ready for painting. And it's a pretty divisive topic too, because a lot of people see that as cheating. And I've gone into this in a bit more detail in my recent video about working from photo reference in your art. But in my opinion, tracing can be used as a tool just like many other things. To me, time is money as a professional artist, and if any artist who can already draw decides to trace their image for speed and accuracy, then I don't really view that as cheating. Personally, my preferred method to speed myself up is to use the grid technique. That to me speeds me up lots and still gives me plenty of accuracy. And I'm going to talk more about the grid method in just a moment, but I just wanted to mention the tracing method first of all, because I also believe that tracing can be used as a teaching aid. I think that if you trace images, you are actually building some muscle memory there of how to sketch as well. I think it improves your accuracy in sketching, and I would even recommend a useful exercise. For example, if you were drawing this, I would suggest to trace it first, then try a gridded version, then try a freehand version. And I bet that your freehand version will be better than it would have been if you had just tried it freehand first. So I think that you learn a lot from tracing, you learn even more from the grid version, and you can take both of those combined into the freehand sketching. So whilst I do place a lot of importance on sketching abilities, I don't necessarily see tracing as a cheat, especially if you're learning to pastel or to paint in a particular medium and you really just want to get straight on to the medium and work on that part of the process rather than spending days and weeks perhaps to get your line drawing as accurately as you would like. So to me, it's all just tools, and tools are there to be used. But what I'm going to do now is a quick demo showing you how I apply the grid method firstly to my line art. This is the one that I probably use most often to, as I mentioned before, speed myself up and not spend many hours on just getting the line art for commission onto my pastel paper. So I've got a small grid drawn out here. and this is the small section of my photo reference that I'm going to work on. I'm just going to do a small section of this to show you the basics of using a grid. So you can see on my photo reference that I have applied a grid to the image. Then I could scale this image to any size I wanted. So all I have to do is make sure that I've got the same number of boxes in my grid on my paper. So I could make each box a foot wide, or I could make it 1 centimeter wide. It really doesn't matter. So I can scale this to any size I want. So on my paper here, I have drawn it out 15 centimeters by 15 centimeters, making each of my boxes just 3 centimeters squared. And I'm going to show you quickly how I would approach getting the outline on here using the grid. So let's just talk about tools firstly. Quite often when I'm working on the initial sketch, I like to use a mechanical pencil, one where the lead comes out further like this. And the main reason is that it's so light. The line that you get is so fine and light, and it's really easily rubbed out, and you can use it very lightly before leaning more heavily later on when you're more sure of your lines. So I like how lightly you can sketch with this. But just for the purposes of today's video, I'm actually going to use just a regular 2B pencil because the other one doesn't show up very well on camera. So I'm going to use this a little bit more dark pencil just so that you can see more clearly what I'm doing on camera. But normally I would try and go pretty light with the first marks that I make, so that I can easily rub them out, remove them, work over the top of them. But let's just make a start then with this. So it's pretty self-explanatory with the grid method that I'm using those squares to guide where my lines should be. So it's pretty straightforward. So I'm just looking at the outline of her face here as it comes down through the boxes. And I'm really judging how far across each box the line should come. So if I'm about 1/3 of the way across the box in the photo reference, then that really guides where my line should be in the drawing. So the grid really is useful for making sure that your proportions and your angles are correct. And I would even say that when I'm drawing freehand, half the time I'm imagining that there is a grid over the top of the image, because I'm really picturing the horizontal and the vertical lines. The only difference being here with the grid, they are physically on the image, so I don't have to imagine that. And you're going to see the difference in my approach when I work freehand in just a moment, because with this method I find that I'm a bit more controlled, really letting the grid guide me, and I don't make very big sweeping marks in this method. I tend to be a bit more controlled, but I'm really not going for any detail initially, just very sweeping straight lines mostly, not even going for the curves on the face at this stage. Keeping it very loose and sketchy. And really just plotting things into place. So looking, for example, where the corner of the eye should be, how far up this box and how far in from the side. Getting a rough idea of the shape of it. So not worrying about anything with detail at the moment. Just getting my measurements in using each box as a guide. So this method is definitely much quicker than freehand. the grids really do help you a lot to see more clearly the angles and the perspective, and it's particularly useful for getting a face which is at an unusual angle like this one is, so it really does keep you right. So for this demo I'll keep it pretty brief. Just show you this small section of the face, and then we'll move on to freehand. But you can see from the grid version here that it's quite easy just to use the grid lines as my guide. You're going to see in a few moments when I do the freehand version that I've got to look for the bigger shapes first. I've got to really create the largest shapes and work my way down to the smaller detail. But with the grid I can literally work on each feature at a time if I want, or I can use that same method and create the bigger shapes. But often for speed I do it just like this, coming in very lightly first of all with the pencil marks. So you can see as I become more sure of where the lines should go, I start to lean a little bit more heavily, make my line a bit more definite. But it's very light and non-committal for the first go over with the pencil. So I can easily rub out or adjust my lines. Never be afraid to get the rubber out and delete what you've done and move things, make adjustments as you go. It should really be a work in progress, and don't be afraid to make lots of adjustments. But the grid really does simplify things and it helps keep me right. And as I said at the start, this is actually my preferred method for sketching out most of my commissioned work. It helps me quickly get the accuracy that I want and get on to the painting stages. But it still, rather than tracing it or something like that, it still makes me analyze the proportions and the perspective. It still makes me study it a little bit, so it's a step up from tracing, because tracing really makes it very easy for you and it doesn't really make you study the proportions. And although this makes it easier, it's still making me draw it out. It's still making me look at the distances between everything, and that definitely helps when it comes to the painting stages. So that's just a very quick and basic way to show you how to use the grid, really making sure that you stick with the vertical and horizontal lines at each step of the way, really helping you to get everything placed in the correct angle and get all of your perspectives correct. So a very quick way to get a line drawing done, but also keeping your hand in with some pencil sketching skills as well. So when I'm drawing freehand, here's a first tip for you. Why not give yourself one box to work within, crop your photo to the same dimensions, then you've at least got the negative space around the shape of the face to help you with certain angles and perspectives. So even just having this outline here gives me a lot to work with. But let's make a start on the freehand version. So when I sketch freehand, I go for the bigger shapes first. So I don't start with one feature or one particular part. I try to get the overall shape of the face. I try to get the center line where the eyes will go, the center line down the vertical of the face where the nose will go. So I really try to create the full tilt of the head first of all. And really don't worry about any individual features initially, just trying to get the outer proportions of the whole head. And again, using the pencil really lightly. You can see that the further away from the lead I hold the pencil, the lighter I can use it. So it's been held very loosely in my grip so that I can use it very lightly, not lean too heavily. I tend to find the closer you hold the pencil to the lead, the more heavily you'll lean with it, the more detail you'll try to create. So try to hold your pencil loosely and really not worry about any detail at this stage. I'm also making a lot of the initial lines quite straight. You can see I'm not worrying about the curve to things right away, making more straight lines and then coming in with the curves afterwards. So there are lots of different methods for sketching out that different artists use, but this is my method that I use. Lots of other artists obviously use this method too, just starting with the bigger block shapes and working your way down to the smaller shapes within. And I would say just to experiment with freehand sketching and find a method that works for you. Today I just want to show you what I like to use, but there are also lots and lots of videos here on YouTube showing different sketching methods. And I think it's really good practice to go and have a look at some of those and have a go at them. As I mentioned at the start, practicing your sketching can only help your painting process. While you're painting, after all, you're using colour and blocks of colour to work up to your lines, but you've still got to analyse what it is that you're seeing, and if you can sketch it out from the start like this, then you've really analysed the face a lot before you even begin to paint, and it helps you so much during the painting process. So just continually making little adjustments and corrections. This sketch is done pretty quickly, so it will by no means be perfect. Normally I like to spend a good few hours on this stage alone, as when I come to paint I like to have most of my proportions correct already and in place. So just doing a quick version here to demonstrate my method. But you can see I'm also looking for the light and shade on the face. And the purpose of my line drawing is to give me a nice clean line over which to paint. So my sketch is never going to be a thing of beauty. It's not really the purpose of my sketch for it to look really nice. All I'm trying to do is get the important information on her face down, and I'm sketching in some of the light and shade areas as well, just very loosely and lightly, and then leaning a little bit more heavily on the main features. But really using the light and shade on her face to help me plot out those proportions. And the whole time that I'm doing this, even though there is no grid, I'm really imagining the vertical and horizontal lines. When I'm looking at the photo reference, I'm trying to judge each little line, whether it's more vertical or more horizontal. So having drawn using the grid lots of times is really, really helpful to your freehand sketching. Just like I said at the start, it's actually quite helpful to have done a bit of tracing, to have done some drawing from using the grid. All of these things do actually help you be able to freehand a bit better. So with the eyes, I usually try to find where the corners should go and make sure that I've got the corners of the eyes lined up. And again, I'm looking at the angle that our eyes are. And if you follow across from the top of her eyes, that should bring you across to pretty much the top of her ear. So using absolutely everything on her face to measure against each other, constantly measuring. And of course, if I were to spend longer on this sketch, when I did come back and look at it at the end, I can spot lots and lots of things that I need to fix. So that's where spending longer on this stage would definitely be more beneficial for me. I do take quite a long time on my sketches. And although I tend to use the grid more often, I do love to freehand sketch, and I feel myself getting better at that as time goes on. But for example, with this sketch, so far it's pretty obvious to me watching this back that I haven't put her ear far enough across to the right. So there should be more space between that corner of her eye and where the ear starts. So if I were spending longer on this, that's the sort of thing that I would adjust. I would rub out the ear where I have it and move it further over to the right. So it's just constant measuring everything against everything. Once you've got it to this stage, then you can start going over your lines from earlier and adding the curves where they should be. So as I mentioned, I'm making mostly straight lines to begin with, and then I start to go back over. Once I'm sure that I've got everything in the right place, I can start to go back over my lines, leaning a little more heavily and starting to add the curves to everything. So just looking at each plane on her face where the light is hitting. And it's also quite tricky actually to sketch sitting to one side like I am in this demo because of where I position my camera. So I'm not sitting right in front of the paper like I should be. So I would suggest to you, make sure that you're nice and square to your drawing paper. It's great if you can have it at a little bit of a tilt on an easel. That way it won't lose some of its perspective if it's lying flat on a table. Sometimes that can happen. It's great if you can have the paper square on to your view. So just making minor adjustments here. As I said, if I were doing this for an actual painting, I would definitely spend a lot longer on it. But I hope that this demo at least shows you my methods of how to make a start on freehand sketching. So of course, neither of these are anywhere near perfect. Normally I would spend a good couple of hours at least on a freehand sketch like this. But I hope that this short demo gives you some idea of how to get started with either the grid method or with freehand sketching. And I'll just quickly show you now a few examples of where I've taken a freehand sketch further into the finished pastel painting. So these are a few examples of my freehand sketches turning into finished work. And if you're interested, all of these are actually available here on my YouTube channel as paint along demos, so you can work right along with me to create the same pieces. So I hope that you've enjoyed this. If you have, please do subscribe here on YouTube and have a look at all of my other content here to help you with lots of different soft pastel techniques. Also lots of other advice for becoming an artist and other general advice that you'll find here on my YouTube channel. Then if you can, please do consider checking me out over on Patreon, as it's those guys' support there that really makes all of these videos possible. But until next time, happy pasteling, and also Happy sketching!